Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a Spotlight. I am Jorge Merced, Associate Artistic Director at Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. And on behalf of our entire family of artists and cultural workers, thank you for joining our weekly series showcasing creatives at work. This episode features artists Melisa Ramos and Edwin Pagan. Known for his work as an artist and cultural activist, Edwin Pagan is the founding member of the photography collective Seis del Sur, along with renowned documentary photographers and photojournalists David Gonzalez, Joe Conso, Ricky Flores, Angel Franco, and Francisco Molina Reyes II. He also founded Latin Horror, an online portal specializing in the art of Latin-influenced horror, its documentation, and promotion as a distinct genre. For the past couple of years, I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Eddie as one of the co-curators for our Stage Garden Rumba free outdoor gatherings of artists and green activists here in the South Bronx. Melisa Ramos is a filmmaker known to Pregones audiences for curating our 21 Islands International Short Film Festival and the first Wednesday's free film series in the Bronx. She also works as a documentary filmmaker in the Bronx. She also works as a documentary filmmaker, recreating through animation and graphics what she believes the camera is sometimes unable to fully capture. Gracias por acompañarnos y que disfruten de este episodio de Spotlight.
My name is Edwin Pagan, and I am an activist and cultural activist and artist from the South Bronx.
My name is Melisa Ramos, and I am from Puerto Rico.
Even though I was born in the Lower East Side, I consider myself a product of the South Bronx because all of my life, this is where I grew up.
I am a filmmaker specialized in post-production and storytelling. I started working with my hands when I was a child. I started sewing when I was 10. I started working with textures, materials, colors. At a very young age, I developed micromotor skills, very, very advanced. But I had in me an intrigue for storytelling all the time. So I found in film that I could combine. I could integrate my audio visual skills, my plastic art skills, and I could storytell. So since a child, I was always intrigued to have this combination of putting my art, my visual art, and telling a story with it that can have words. I did an adaptation of a news that happened in PR. It happened that they found this woman, this old woman, she had the body of her husband for 7 months in her apartment. She dies, and then they find her, and then they find the body. So I wrote this story that for me was still a love story, even though you can find that extremely creepy. But for me, it was a love story. I saw there that the way I tell the story worked and it appealed to others.
I got introduced to photography when I was 10 years old. My mother enrolled me in the boys club because she was a single parent and she wanted me to do something with all my energy. Once I came home from school, Ernesto Lozano was there, who was the artistic director of the Boys Club and the one that taught the classes. Ernie became my mentor for about 5 or 6 years. He taught me how to take pictures, how to develop, how to print. They would send me out on assignments, and it would be to cover events in the community for different organizations, not profits, when they had block parties, protests, etc. So that taught me early on that there was a secondary important need to creating images, which was giving back to organizations that needed those images. And it also exposed me in a really good way in the community that were supporting the community during this sort of period, which was really devastating.
Currently, I'm working on doing music videos for, I think it's like 3 musicians. They have this concept called Baya Monster. It is like plena punk. It's very interesting, right? It's using the plena and bomba music, but with a lot of electronic elements. It has been a really nourishing process. I made an interpretation of the song, of what can this represent and how can I put it in a way that it is dark, but you don't feel it dark. You can even laugh. Another project I'm working on is that I'm doing an animated series of Caribbean mythology. I want to bring the stories of the Caribbean that no one tells us. And this perception that we are just islands or we are one island. No, we are part of an archipelago. And these stories are so connected. We are connected with the Dominican Republic, with Haiti, with Cuba, with Jamaica. So I'm really excited about these animations.
I've been taking pictures now since I was 10. I'm 56, so you do the math. I've been doing it for quite a while. One of the things I always say is, no South Bronxites were ever hurt in the making of my art. The thing you'll never see in any of my pictures is poor people. And the reason is that while all of this was happening around us, we were raising our children. We were having the time of our lives, just because the environment was falling around our ears didn't stop us from living life. And the only time you'll see images that portray us in a negative light is when people from outside the community were parachuted in to cover us. I don't think that any of the images or any of the narrative that I've written over the years has been looking at the community in a negative way. It's been trying to show the world that people live here, people raise families, people move on to bigger things, people give back to the world. When I create my art, and this has always been the case, I'm looking at my community through fresh eyes. That's not to say that I don't know the landscape, but I'm always looking at the community through what is exciting aesthetically, right? What am I going to keep inside that frame and what's going to be left outside that frame? Looking and seeing are 2 different things. When you look at the world one way and you're trying to get around, that's that. But when you begin to see the difference in things, what the truth in your environment, people, how they interact, you start getting a different consciousness about how you can document the community. When I was a young man, I documented what was accessible to me, which was other young kids playing. And then there was a period there where the work started getting a little denser. And you'll see the transition between sort of what I call street portraits, candid portraits, to these more sort of dense pictures that have dozens of people either dancing, garifuna dancing in a park, or people in the Lower East Side playing congas in front of adelas. Color for me has been an evolution of probably the last 10 to 15 years. Before that, it was all black and white. The thing about black and white, too, is that you are focusing purely on the subject. You're not thinking about color. You're not thinking about any contrast in terms of red or blue. You're just looking at your image, and you're also just looking at what the subject is. So in that sense, it's sort of a pure take on the imagery. The difference for me with color is that, if you're looking at what people wear, if you're looking at what's in the background, it's about, for me, it's always been about what's the contrast in colors. What is someone doing against another surface that's important? So if somebody's wearing yellow and then you see something behind them that's red, and there's that sort of opposite color spectrum, to me, that's very exciting.
When I create my art, I like to, first of all, go through textures and colors. Because my background since a kid was with fabrics, with materials, with sand, with wood, with anything I could find, I go back to that skill and to that craft when I do my animations, right? In that process, I align the colors, I move them. How are these textures gonna look when they move, right? I refer a lot to painters and to master painters in terms of the aesthetic. But then when I'm going to animate, I have this challenge because all these textures are going to move. And when they move, they can disappear, they can blend with others. So that is the challenge I have as an animator. You have to trust your eye and understand the colors and how they balance and how is this gonna work. I think I feel it better when I go back to the main craft. So that sparks the creativity process in me. In cinema and in animation, I like to look at the old experimental German styles, how they would use cinema as a canvas, right? More than not necessarily a story, the story is interpreted by the audience. So cinema turns into a canvas, so it's very unexpected. And it works with colors, with shapes, and things that you are like creating, like if you are a fine arts artist, and I really like that.
I was never afraid to get in close. So even though you can see that there is maybe an image of somebody having a fight in the street, in the case of Orchard Beach, which is one particular shot of mine that's gotten published a lot, you'll see that there's a lot of space around the fight and people sort of in awe that they're fighting, right? They're like, what's going on? There's one distinct photo that I call it Boys Vamping. I took it on 3rd Avenue and 149th Street in the Hub. And these kids come by, about 3 or 4 of them, and they're just like making what I call a noise storm, you know, and they pass by me, so I wait to I stop taking pictures, and they double back on me and they say, hey, why don't you take our picture? And, you know, I took about 3 or 4 photos just because I wanted to get them out their way. And, you know, when I developed the film later, I realized that that was a story. That was a story. That also taught me something too. Never be dismissive of what's going on around you. Be open to the moment, because sometimes you go out with the intention of something you want to capture and something else develops.
So for me, Pregones is a huge artistic family. Besides an institution and a hub of creation, it is like this collage of artists that welcome the community and welcome artists in order to develop more art and to contribute to our community. Pregones is not only an artistic institution, it is an educational institution.
Pregones is a community organization grounded in the heart for me and in my thoughts, in the sense that it has always challenged me as an artist. So the first project that I really got into the trenches with Pregones was working on a production that ultimately became called Promise of a Love Song. It was Pregones representing the South Bronx, Junebug Productions in New Orleans, and Roadside Theater in Appalachia, part of Apple Shop. And I found that to be really interesting because I know that a lot of work like this is being done today and it has all kind of names. But Pregones was doing that 15, 20 years ago, where they sort of went into the communities and wanted to know what our differences and the things that sort of unified us, right? And let's have that discussion. Let's talk about these issues openly. We would get into these rooms and we would talk about these things. And it wasn't just coming from the groups that were part of the theater groups. If you were in the room and you had an experience that you wanted to relay, that was also part of what was discussed, right? Because you were part of that community.
The burst of 21 Islands International Short Film Festival came after I had a short film presented in a film festival in Puerto Rico. And my partner was so blown away with the event. And the director, Rosalba, had this desire to make a project that involves islands. So she proposed the 21 Islands International Short Film Festival. And my background in education gives me this advantage to develop a criteria to evaluate the work. Now, curating, directing the festival has been a much bigger challenge. First, I would say we had maybe 500 shorts, which is that is a huge amount in any film festival. But now we have gone to the point of 2,000 submissions per year. And what I love about the festival is that every year that I curate the shorts, it gives me a glimpse of what is happening in the world, even more than the news.
In the last 2 years, we worked on a series that, I just had the best time working with the organization. Stage Garden Rumba took culture and activism and took it around in the South Bronx to a half dozen community gardens and connected with the community in a real way through music, poetry, spoken word, dance. We brought activists to sort of speak in between some of these performances with the community feel it, or where the community would say, this is taking us out of what we want to see, which was the entertainment. But no, you could see people leaning forward when the activists spoke, because they were also under the notion that this had value too. It wasn't just the Bombay Plena, it wasn't just the mariachi music, it wasn't just the poetry. This is part of our community. And these were people speaking that also represented them in the bigger issues, whether it was about violence against women, housing, or land use. They knew that these are the people fighting for me, and so they respected that. There's always a feeling of being approachable and that the work reflects our reality. And I think that that's not something you see everywhere else. Sometimes people are just giving you entertainment, and that has value in itself. But with Pregones' work, you get more than that. You get the artistic endeavor, but you also get the interaction, the engagement, and you'll always see yourself reflected back in the work.
Right, once the pandemic begins in the US and the restrictions are put on the theaters in New York, Pregones immediately proposed to do the festival online. And I think that even with knowing or not, they were really going a step ahead more than any other film festival that I have seen. And I was a little concerned at the beginning, because I said, what if the film directors don't want their films to be online, and that way not be qualified for other film festivals? But it was the opposite. The directors were thrilled that their films were going to be shown. They were thrilled that this festival has shown so much solidarity, that they did not just postpone it and say, just wait a year. No, they continued. And the experience was actually very fulfilling and very productive. Pregones established a voting system where people can vote and vote for the audience award. So there are things that we don't see as much when a film festival is paralyzed, is stopped. So basically, Pregones is going a step ahead. That is when you see that there is a team that has vision. And I think that was amazing.
So long before I really started writing and doing my own films, I first started working for a lot of people doing their films as a cinematographer, doing the lighting. I got to work with a lot of really good directors, whether they were seasoned or emerging, that showed me how to produce a film. So that whole evolution during that period was really good for me, leading up to me doing my own films. And I think that's one of the things of being an artist, that you never start learning. You're learning all the time. The Latin horror portal got launched back in Halloween of 2008. I sort of got into that space once because I've always been a horror fan. So I was looking for something to keep myself occupied. And one day it hit me. Soy Latino, I love horror, and I'm a filmmaker. And when I thought I put those two together, I came up with the concept of Latin horror. And so I saved the name right away, bought the name online, and then built a really cheesy, the earliest portal in 2008 that launched was just a couple of stories. Most of it was in one of these blogs where I kept my stories. And but I started getting a lot of response for it. The people that love horror are just the best fans. They're loyal, they love the genre, and they don't care if it's Japanese horror, Latin horror, black horror, they just love it. One of the people that I look up to, Guillermo del Toro, Mexican national great director, he's once said that the difference between American horror and Latin horror is that American horror destroys the physical, right? The body, etc. Latin horror destroys the mind and the soul. So it's more about psychological trauma and mystery and ghost stories. We have a culture rich in literature and folklore based on ghosts, creatures of the night, and things of that nature that we have as part of our folklore and our literature. And so when we do stories, we believe that these things exist. We believe that there is an entity, a supernatural entity. We just want to know why it's after us or why it's in this house causing chaos. And so from the minute that we get past the first 2 minutes of the film, it's about character development. In American films, it's plot. This happens, this happened, that's happened, but there's no rich story. And in Latin horror, you get rich stories.
I have learned that it is a history of so much struggle and resilience. And it really has touched me, and in a way of seeing how can a population rebel and do a revolution that impacts the world. And I think even under such sad circumstances, I think that is something amazing. And I think it deserves so much respect for the minorities, for the Black communities, the Latino communities, saying we are tired and we are done with this. We count.
Over the last few months, I've learned that what we're seeing take place throughout the United States and incrementally throughout the world is that people are lifting their voices to demand what it is that we should have on ground zero as a human right, which is the respect for human nature, the respect for who we are, what kind of things we want to do. But I think that there's a groundswell that we're seeing now with Black Lives Matter and other issues being connected to that, where we're taking back the narrative that's resonated around the world. I mean, when you wake up and on the news, you see that there are kids and women and men saying Black Lives Matter in Palestine, which is a community right now that's going through their struggles. You know that this is much more than just a protest. This is a movement. This is the people rising up and saying enough is enough. Now, here we are, we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic. And one of the things I have to say is that we've been through that before. We went through that in the 70s and 80s when we had the pandemic of greed. We had the pandemic of the city turning its back against us, political indifference. And we went through a time where the neighborhood was burning around us. And the thing that always strikes me about the people in the South Bronx and the arts community, that we're resilient. Resiliency for the Bronx has always been part of its DNA. And so when we in the Bronx say Bronx Strong, that's not just a phrase, that's who we are.
You can impact so much just by listening and just by witnessing it. Like, it's that moment that you are living, and being more open to listening to other perspectives, right? Because we sometimes get caught in our communities, but we see that we are one community that's part of a big community, and that we're all in this together.
I'm very proud to be from the South Bronx, and you can probably find me if I did do mountain climbing on Mount Everest, and if I met somebody up there, I would probably tell them I'm from the South Bronx, and they would probably tell me, oh, I'm from there too. We're everywhere, and we're proud to be with it. We don't negate it, and there's a sort of grit and swag and sort of collective that we carry with us everywhere. And I don't think there's any place like it, and I'm proud to be from here. If something strikes you, whether it's because you like to write, because you like to create, you want to paint, you have a knack for poetry and spoken language, whether it's photography, film, any kind of endeavor, whether it's the arts or not, I think just you have to express to those around you first that this is of interest to you, and also find every time and every moment that you can learning about your craft.
Don't procrastinate, and be more diligent with your decisions, right? This field is about decision making.
Practice your craft, and you're always going to find someone that believes in you enough that they'll become your mentor. Just believe in yourself and practice your vocation. Practice what it is that you want to do, and that'll lead you on the right path.
Take more risk it. And one thing is that you don't have to do something knowing it all, because the master artists, a lot of them did not know what they were doing. They had skills, but then they invent something, someone gives it a name, and they didn't even know that they were doing surrealism, right? So that's why we have to take the risk, because you don't define it. The world is going to define it. You just have to enjoy it.